Welcome to the Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hello, I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Mike, today's guest on the podcast is David Steele. David has started several diverse companies. His first company he started was a financial advisory company. It currently has over $1 billion under management. That's a good-sized business. His second company is a restaurant. Actually, he's expanded that one restaurant into 6 restaurants, all in the greater San Francisco area. We had a great conversation about building teams, developing a culture, and the challenges of running such diverse businesses.
Sounds really interesting, Bela. You know I love this kind of interview. People with kind of an interesting vision and a philosophy, and it spreads into some different areas. This should be kind of my cup of tea. So let's get right to it.
Hello, David. Welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you very
thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Let me start off by asking you a question. When you're at a social event, a non-work related social event, and you get introduced to someone, and after the introduction, they say to you, "Oh, very nice to meet you, David. What do you do?" How do you answer that question?
Well, if I'm with somebody who knows me, that is to say I'm not alone, or maybe even if I am alone, I usually have a smile on my face because my background is, it's a little odd. I mean, because my entrepreneurial pursuits have been in a bunch of different spaces, and so it's hard for me to answer. Normally, I answer by saying my primary role is as founder and CEO of a financial planning company that I started decades ago called One Wealth Advisors. And I also have since then started a restaurant company that has many restaurants.
Great.
And that, of course, then gets me into deeper conversations with people usually.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole idea, hopefully.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll get us into a deeper conversation. Let's start off by sort of talking about One Wealth Advisors, which is the financial advisory firm that you started. Tell me about the genesis of that.
Well, I mean, we launched the company something like 10 years ago, and we have like a $1.1 billion in assets under management now. And people are like, "Oh my goodness, you built that in 10 years. That's incredible." And I tell them that my actual story begins in 1991, where I was a young 24-year-old financial advisor rolling on my sleeves, working for a little regional financial advisory firm, acquiring, if you will, one client at a time, making no money. It was really hard. I was a kid, didn't know what I was doing. And my potential clients, of course, knew I didn't know what I was doing because it's obvious. And so it really was one client at a time. And that was it was a really, it's not a place to get to develop instant wealth, that's for sure. And so my first hire when I could afford him was my brother, who came on as, I guess, my admin, if you will. And he's now, of course, my co-founding partner of One Wealth. But again, it was him and I, just sort of one client at a time. And fast forward, we were with Bear Stearns, which anybody who's somewhat old enough will know the name, that were right in the crosshairs of what became the credit crisis. And Bear Stearns was bought by JP Morgan, which was in essence organized by the government to save Bear Stearns from going out of business. We woke up all of a sudden employed by this big bank. And I will tell you, I'm a huge fan of Jamie Dimon and a big fan of JP Morgan in terms of what they represent to the global and US economy. I was not a big fan of working for this huge company. We stayed for years and they tried to assimilate us, but Bear Stearns was a very entrepreneurial firm that really did allow us to build a bespoke practice in the way we wanted to and serve our clients in the way we wanted to. JP Morgan, needless to say, is not like that. And so that's when we decided to launch One Wealth. So that's a long-winded answer saying this is not a company really that was built in 10 years. It was built in 33 years. We did officially start our own company about 10 years ago. And we brought all of our clients, most of our clients with us. So we knew we had instant revenue the day we launched because of that.
Got it. Got it. So at Bear Stearns, were you pretty much almost like an independent person and you build your own book of business, right? So it's like having your own business, except they provide some back office and infrastructure stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's as close to being an entrepreneur as the financial services industry would allow, probably, without actually being an entrepreneur where you're in charge of your own bank account and legal document filings and tax returns and all the business of the business you don't have to deal with. But they really did allow you to do things the way you wanted to. And in fact, if I wanted to hire somebody, we pled our case, and normally they'd be like, okay, well, however it impacts your profitability, let's just work it out. At JP, that's what pushed us over the edge, actually. At JP Morgan, we always wanted to hire in advance of need because we would rather make less money and serve our clients really, really well with a large number of service providers per client, if you will. And JP Morgan was much more mathematical about it. And we wanted to hire somebody and we were willing to take a pay cut in order to hire them. They still wouldn't let us because it didn't, cross the T's and dot the I's the way they wanted to. And so that was what actually pushed us over the edge finally to leave. It's like, we can't do this the way we want to do it. Bear Stearns is very different.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. So what was that first day like? So, okay, I'm leaving Jamie Dimon and we're hanging up our own shingle, and we can talk to our clients, but you also have to be a little bit careful there in taking clients with you. So help our audience understand that process a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, well, California has always pretty much ignored non-competes. So we weren't concerned about whether, because we were based in California, we weren't too concerned about we didn't sign a non-compete and they didn't push us because we were in California and they knew it wasn't enforceable. Right. We weren't too concerned about that. There is something called broker protocol, which meant that the books and records of the clients stays with the firm. So we couldn't take books and records, but there was nothing precluding us from having a way to get in touch with our clients. And so we weren't too worried about that. We were I'll give you the details. Everybody goes home at 2:00 on a Friday. And the branch manager would normally, with an advisor leaving a firm, hand out the accounts as quickly as they can to get the other advisors to try to keep the client's business. Well, of course, we know this and everybody knows this. So we resigned right at about noon on a Friday, knowing that they wouldn't have time and we'd have the entire weekend to get through with everybody. I think we brought somewhere between 90 and 95% of our clients with us.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's really indicative of the sort of relationship that you have with your clients, right? In this business, it's more about that personal relationship and the good service and advice that you've given them, as opposed to the mothership and the brand of the mothership.
I think so. I have been hearing the death of the financial advisor since I got in the business. First, it was E-Trade was going to put financial advisors out of business. Well, that didn't exactly happen. Then I've heard a few years ago about so-called robo-advisors with Betterment and Wealthfront are going to put us out of business. That didn't happen. And now I'm hearing AI is going to put us out of business. I believe, I don't care until we have sort of Terminator-like existence on this planet. I think humans are going to want to really deal with humans. We're using AI and we were using algorithms and so-called robo-advisors as part of our offering to our clients, but our clients want to deal with people. It's relationships. And we learned that a long time ago. people want to, listen, I don't mean to get too philosophical, but I really think human motivation is all predicated in two things, which is seeking love and value.
Yeah.
And we made it clear to our clients that we love and value them, and that we, over time, became loved and valued by them. And so there's an intimacy to that, and we don't take that lightly. We don't take it for granted just because we know there's emotional ties that bind the client to us. But the truth is, we have grown at 20% a year without picking up the phone in 15 years. It's by referral only. And if we lose one client a year, that was a really bad year for us. So yeah, we've done a really good job nurturing relationships.
Where does this focus on love and value, where are the roots of that with you?
My mother, a couple years ago, I didn't send her a birthday card. I didn't send her a gift, which is really weird. I called on her birthday and I didn't say happy birthday. And I started talking to her, and I said, she asked me, of course, how I'm doing. I didn't ask her a word about how she's doing. And I just went into a seemingly narcissistic rant about, oh my God, I'm so excited. Our financial planning company is, we're creeping up on $1 billion in assets under management with zero employee turnover, almost never losing a client, growing at 20% a year. And man, my restaurants, we've got 7 restaurants, and they're growing and they're financially disciplined. And I think they're involved in the conversation of culture, and the team loves working together. We've been working together for 15 years. And everything I'm doing is flourishing in my professional life. And I have so many friends, and I feel so rich and nourished every day. And happy birthday, Mom. This is all because of you. It's what you taught me.
Very
nice.
So
it's everything I've built as an entrepreneur has been based on relationships with clients, customer, my business partners. It's all related. It's all people. And my mom taught me that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you said that about relationships, because I reflect back on my career, and I think I had I got to remember 11 or 12 different jobs. Some of those were startups that I started. Others were working for, Fortune 100 companies. And every one of those experiences, jobs, whatever you want to call them, that I got, except for one, was because of a pre-existing relationship. And I answered thousands of job advertisements, but only one of those led to a job. And all of the other ones were because I knew someone, or someone knew me, or referred me, et cetera. So I think we often lose sight of that in today's society. We think that just because of where we went to school or what we've done for the last 5 years is good enough. And it turns out it probably is good enough. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient in order to get you that position.
Yeah, we have with my financial planning company, we have a requirement that every team member proactively and strategically builds their community. We don't call it networking. We don't call it business development, but we do track people's efforts to build their community. And we explicitly tell people that nobody is to ask anybody for business. All you are required to do is build your community and trust that eventually business will come our way because of those efforts to build your community. I think you've mentioned all of your jobs, or most of them have come because of relationships. I had read a study a few years ago that said, I think 93% of all job placement has to do with your network, and something like less than 7% is from answering ads. So that doesn't surprise me to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you say about building community. So there's an attorney that I know very well here in upstate New York, out of Albany, who's been on the podcast a couple of times. And he is the go-to attorney for entrepreneurial startups and early stage companies, all the way up through, a transaction, a sale. And he's the go-to person. And he never asks for business. He's building his community. He's showing his face. He's going to events. He's making deposits into the bank account, so to speak, right? He's adding value to that community. And then at some point in time, those engagements naturally come from that community after you've made, and people, because when you make deposits or make contributions to a community, you garner trust. And trust is one of the most important things in financial advisor, an attorney, a doctor, and a bunch of these types of positions. That's the most important thing.
When I do business consulting with anybody, which I occasionally have a business consulting entrepreneurial type gig, and I try to tell the entrepreneur, remember this framing. If you want advice from someone, ask them for money. But if you want money from someone, ask them for advice. Which is, I think, to say that by asking somebody for advice, you're celebrating their humanity, their intelligence, you're disarming them, and they inevitably want to do business with you, or certainly they think highly of you to the point where they'll refer you to other people. So yeah, I agree.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because I have used that line multiple times when people have come to me and said, "Hey, Bela, I'm trying to raise a $3 million fund. What suggestions do you have?" And I say, call up people in your Rolodex and ask them for advice on how to do this.
That's it. And when I'm doing consulting and people are raising money, I have them build a visual deck that's very professional, and really it's a true strategic plan. And then they're like, "Well, what do I do now?" Well, have a meeting and have a cup of coffee with everybody show it to them and say, "Hey, what do you think of this idea? I would really love your feedback." Don't ask them to invest.
Right.
And no, will 100% or even 50 or even 20% of people say yes? Probably not, but 10% probably will. And they're going to 50% of that 10% is going to refer you to other people, and so forth and so on.
Yeah. And by not asking for the money, like you said, it disarms people. Because those people are constantly being asked for money.
That's it.
Right.
It also feels better. It really sucks actually selling. It's really wonderful and lovely to just develop relationships with people.
Oh, that's excellent advice. So I had another question for you. So you start this financial advising business, and yes, you bring some clients with you, but also in that business, you sort of need a back office. You need, it's not just setting up a little, renting some office space and say, "Hey, away we go." You need a whole infrastructure. You need a whole back office. How did you go about setting that up?
There are platforms that exist. For example, one of the components you may be referring to is what we call custody, where a client asset's held. You don't want, a $1.1 billion held by a 12-person company that could, go away theoretically. So we custody our assets with Fidelity. They're a wonderful partner for us. There are others out there. We chose Fidelity. We think they're best in class. And then there's all the analytics and performance reporting type stuff. There's a company called InvestNet, beginning with an E as in Edward, InvestNet. And there we think they're best in class for that type of data management, if you will. And so it's actually, we hired a company called Dynasty Financial to help us launch. And we realized within a couple of years of working with them that we probably could have done it ourselves by going and interviewing the Fidelities and the InvestNets and the other tools that we ended up needing. They had all this stuff packaged. And so we paid them a fee annually to give us this package. But the truth was we could have put the package together on our own. It's actually not that hard. Our industry, it's the biggest trend in the financial advisory space, which is advisors with large firms leaving those large firms and forming their little independent financial planning firms. So as a result of that, there are, of course, plenty of platform components that you can plug in to your overall platform.
Yeah, I started with a couple of partners, started a private equity firm. And the same thing exists on the private equity side, right? You can basically hire somebody who gives you all that back office support, and you have the same thing. You're doing capital calls, you're making investments, et cetera. So very nice. Hey, before we dive into the restaurant business, which is what I want to do here shortly, is there anything that I haven't asked you about One Wealth Advisors that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, we're a little bit of a socialistic, capitalistic experiment. When we were at Bear Stearns, even in JP Morgan, it was a very eat what you kill type of energy. A lot of fiefdoms and a lot of sort of tribalism. And when we launched our firm, we put everybody on a set pay with automatic 5% raises every year. Everybody in lieu of bonuses gets a percentage of distributable cash, which we do distribute cash in excess of working capital every quarter. So there's no bonuses. And if somebody, an individual, brings in a really, really big client that all of a sudden bumps the revenue for the company, well, guess what? They don't get paid any more or less than if they didn't bring the client in. On the other hand, if a client, God forbid, were to leave us and there was a primary relationship manager to that client, that person doesn't get paid any less. That is to say, we're all for one and one for all. And so we have a 12-person team that really, truly follow the money, is paid the same regardless of who the client is. And that therefore all 12 people are always working for every client. And so I say it's an experiment because I acknowledge that there have been occasions where maybe people have felt as though they deserve more money, or this other person wasn't working as hard, or maybe they weren't as smart, or whatever. And so those are definitely things we need to address and to try to create a nice healthy culture. But it seems to be working because our turnover is darn near zero.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that. As you were talking about that, it got me thinking that when compensation is sort of directly tied to your, eat what you kill, so to speak, then oftentimes managers or leaders of the organization don't do their job because they figure that the person, when they stop making money, will leave. So, right. So that just, okay, I don't have to worry about that. Bela's been selling less and less and less. At some point he'll just leave. So I don't have to just sit down and have a conversation with him to say, hey, you're not pulling your weight. It relieves me of that whole burden. In the model you're talking about, the team and the leaders of the team have a responsibility to the team of making sure that, people are working to the best of their abilities and stuff.
I watched a movie flew back from Europe yesterday, and I watched a Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And he played John Nash, I think, was the mathematician who the character he played. And I think John Nash won the Nobel Prize for developing a particular theory that had, prior to that, economically argued that everybody looked out for themselves. And he developed a theory that said, yes, everybody looks out for themselves and looks out for what's in the best interest of everybody. Yeah. And I think that's what he won the Nobel Prize for. I'm probably flubbing exactly the way I'm describing it, but it makes me think of that. I mean, I'm not sure we could be 1,000-person company and have this type of compensation structure. I don't want to be 1,000-person company. I think at a 12-person company, it's easier to take this more ideologically driven structure, where, guess what? If you're not pulling your weight, maybe you're overpaid versus your efforts, but you know what you're going to be? You're going to be somebody that's obvious to everybody else that they're not pulling their weight, and you're not adhering to your inherent social responsibility.
Yeah, that's right. And it'll be not only obvious to your coworkers, it should also be obvious to you. So when you have this type of structure, how do you think about hiring? Let's say you need a new person. So how do you make sure that they sort of fit in within this type of structure?
Well, I already know the answer to this question, so I'll ask it after I say this. I was going to begin by asking you this question, but I'll ask it after. Every time I've hired somebody who supposedly is great for a senior role in any one of my businesses, I've been disappointed. And every time I nurture and develop somebody from the ground up, I know what I'm dealing with, and I'm rarely disappointed. And so when we launched One Wealth, we pretty much, I mean, this is not a hard and fast rule, but it's what we've done thus far. Everybody comes in literally at quote unquote the bottom. I don't like hierarchically describing it that way, but it is a very entry level role. We call it it's our client service team has 5 people on the team, and they handle all the operational, administrative, service oriented needs that our clients may have. And it's run by a wonderful woman who's been with us since the beginning. And any new person goes into that team, and it's not apparent where they're going to end up ultimately in terms of their career development. So what we're not getting are mercenary-like heavy hitters, because inevitably they're not going to come in at an entry level for the type of compensation that comes with an entry level position. But what we are getting is we're getting somebody who's learning the business from the ground up, and we're developing them in a culture that they're probably going to really become part of.
Yeah. Excellent. Hey, so let's switch gears. In addition to having One Wealth Advisors, you have a half a dozen or so restaurants.
Yeah.
So share with us a little bit about, okay, things are going great. Now I'm going to open a restaurant. I mean, where does that come from?
Yeah, I grew up poor, which is to say, at the age of 16 in New Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia, the first minute I could get a job, I got a job as a dishwasher in a restaurant. And then I moved up to a higher position, like doing prep cooking, and then saw the busboys and the servers coming into this dirty kitchen, working half the hours, making twice the money. And I said, oh, I want that. So I moved to becoming a busboy and then a server, and eventually I was a manager of a restaurant. And I worked as a captain in a very high-end Michelin-starred type restaurant, all through high school and college. So for 8 years, from 16 to 24. Took me a while to graduate college. I wasn't the quickest study. And so I loved the restaurant business, but I worked for a bunch of artists, if you will, that had what I would say an abstract relationship with money and business principles. And so I assumed that going into the restaurant business meant one had to be unstable financially. They wouldn't have financial security. I didn't work with anybody. I worked with a lot of restaurant owners, none of which had financial security. And they were all great restaurants. So I just had this assumed correlation. So I went to the library when those existed, with books in them, I should say. And I went to in a book, I found the highest paying job for somebody with only a 4-year degree. It said stockbroker. And I left the restaurant. Well, actually, I stayed in restaurant the first year because I was making no money. I had no clients. So I worked weekends in a restaurant and worked during the day as a financial advisor. But I finally was making enough money to quit the restaurant job and focus all on financial advisory. But I vowed to eventually open a restaurant under the hypothesis that there could be a healthy tension between artistic ideals and financial discipline. And that they could coexist. So it took me about 15 years. I'd written a very basic version of a business plan for my first restaurant years prior, but it took me about 15 years to get comfortable with my financial situation, where I then went to my brother and said, hey man, I got to do this. And he actually was a cook in college, and we actually had fantasized maybe about opening a restaurant together someday. But then he was working with me and we were comfortable and doing well. And I said, hey man, I got to do this. He goes, I totally understand. Totally get it. And so I had put a team together. I spent a year networking, developing my community in the restaurant space, getting to know people in San Francisco, and put a team together, and we activated and we opened what is still around and one of the most successful restaurants in the history of San Francisco, called Flour and Water. It's like flour plus water. like the ingredients for dough. It was sort of artisanal pizza pasta restaurant, very gastronomic and pretty respected from a culinary perspective. I I thought I had to sell my apartment to come up with half the money because it was 2008. I was raising money for this restaurant. Nobody would give a first-time restaurateur. Nobody would invest. I had 10 friends say yes to me, but I had to put up half the capital myself. So I sold my apartment and did it. And we had lines around the block the day we opened and still do 16 years later. Pretty crazy. So I went to my partners and I said, listen, as you know, I have a day job. I love being an executive with this restaurant, but I'm not going to work the floor. I'm not going to come in and what I do. I said, I think we can build a company here, not just a restaurant. And I had observed a lot. I think through osmosis, I watched my clients of my financial planning company succeed and fail as entrepreneurs and as professionals. And so I think through osmosis, I learned a set of business principles that I was able to apply to the first restaurant. And then eventually we just kept opening restaurants, and most of them succeeded with varying degrees of success, from somewhat successful to very successful. And now we have a bunch of restaurants, and we have a consumer packaged goods business that we launched. We're on something like 400 grocery store shelves with 4 SKUs of dried pasta, and we're launching frozen pizza this month, and our goal is to eventually be a national brand. But yeah, it started with a much more humble expectation.
Wow. So in your financial planning business, you said you have about a dozen employees,
Yep.
right? And that's one of those things where you can see everybody every day, you run into each other, you sort of know what's going on. And, in a restaurant, if it's one restaurant, you might be able to do that if you were there, if that was your full-time job. But as you start getting other locations and the organization starts getting larger, what were some of the challenges going from, one restaurant to 2 restaurants, from 2 to 4, et cetera?
We knew early on that we wanted to do real, true organizational development in the restaurant company. The financial planning company is a 12-person team with 0% turnover. The restaurant company is 250 plus employees, but it's an executive team of 9 people with 0% turnover, ranging from my founding co-partner, Tom McNaughton, Chef Tom, who is now the CEO of the restaurant company, who was 24 when I hired him, and then saw I had a genius as an employee and immediately begged him to become my partner and gave him equity. But he's the CEO of our company now, and he really is it's his company more than my company, truthfully. But Ryan Polnow, who's our executive chef, has been with us for, I think, 14 years. Vanya, our chief people officer, has been with us for 13 or 14 years. Kara, our CFO, has been with us for 13 or 14 years. I mean, everybody, we've been together for a long time. And of course, each of those people, when I read off their titles in the org chart now, and I talk about organizational development, that's not what they did 16, 15, 14, 13 years ago, but we were developing people along the way. So as we grew, we scaled these people, and we eventually became an executive team that have people reporting to them. Each of them have teams of 3, 5, 7, 10 that they run their team the way that we run the executive team. And so I'm not pretending like we have figured out this massive unlock for how to scale a company, but I think maybe we have.
Mm-hmm. So as you get multiple locations, what are some of the processes? And this is true for any business, not just the restaurant business, but I think it's really true in the restaurant business. What kind of processes do you put in place to sort of get consistency in both the level of service and the quality of the food and all of those things that are very important to your customers?
Well, I would imagine that if you're in the middle of America and you see a Starbucks, you get excited because you know what you're going to get.
Right.
And if you're in the middle of Milan, Italy, and you see a Starbucks, you run from it, possibly. even though it's the same cup of coffee, there's something referred to as the artistic process, which is a celebration of the variance of results, artisanship, and the scientific process, which is a complete disdain for the variance of results. And what we try to do in our company is have a healthy tension. I keep talking about this healthy tension. You hear me say it a lot because I do think about it that way. A healthy tension between artisanship, or the artistic process, and the scientific process. So when we launch a new restaurant, inevitably we're going to try to duplicate as many systems and processes in the identical way, whether it be the tech stack, whether it be how the restaurant's organized in terms of org chart, reporting, how people handle meetings, what happens in the meetings, what the strategic planning process is. It's going to be as identical as we can get it. But each dish coming out of that, even if it's a pizza, I don't want a machine making that. So it's a balance between the artistic and scientific process.
Yeah, for sure. Is each restaurant fundamentally have the same menu, or are they very different?
Well, when COVID hit, we woke up when COVID hit, prior to COVID, thinking, man, look at this. We've got, I don't know, 5 restaurants or something like that. And they were all doing really well. And we were all making good cash flow, and everybody was happy. And COVID hit, and we had, went from that to no business without knowing if we were going to get government support or anything. So Chef Tom and I spent the weekend developing what we call to put the offense in the field plan. So when this ends, who are we going to be? What are we going to come out of this with the offense on the field? And we realized that we had these different restaurants, but they were all different. And that in fact was not scalable. Even though we tried to have repeated systems and processes at each restaurant, we loved that each restaurant had a different name and had a different concept. And the menus were in fact wildly different price points, maybe even different service. So what we came out of that weekend of planning was this desire to scale the Flour and Water pizzeria concept, so that each of them, in fact, would be the same, and to launch and eventually scale a national consumer packaged goods business, starting with dried pasta and eventually frozen pizza and maybe other things in that regard. So who we were before COVID and who we now are is a realization that we had done everything so differently then, and we're now trying to become a truly scalable company.
Yeah. Excellent. So if you reflect back on COVID, what was the biggest challenge for you guys, other than restaurants being closed?
This isn't going to be politically correct for me to say, but once government support came in, we had already furloughed all of our employees. We had to. We passed through a company legally. There was not, there was a couple $100,000 in each restaurant's account, which of course could not employ people for very long with no revenue coming in. So we had to furlough everybody. Then government support came in the form of pure cash that of course had to be applied to expenses, but it turned us into, because we could apply that cash to expenses, it was actually a very profitable period for most restaurants. Anybody who went out of business right after COVID, honestly, just to be blunt, they probably pushed that cash through the thing and retired. I hate to say it. It's, again, not politically correct, but I know people who actually did that, frankly. We didn't. We were still around, and we actually reinvested a lot of the surplus cash back into the company. But it was actually, from a cash flow perspective, it was, because of government support, it was fine. We were able to not only survive, but eventually invest and flourish. But what it did was it made us realize that we weren't diversified enough. Had we had a consumer packaged goods business and it scaled the pizzeria concept where people were eating at home, that would be an example of the benefit of a true portfolio of different lines of revenue. So that was the biggest challenge, was not having a true portfolio with lines of revenue, and quickly realizing that we wanted to have that, not even if there was going to be another COVID, although who knows, maybe there will be, but for myriad things that could happen.
Yeah. So this question may be a little bit too deep into the weeds, but I'm just curious. When COVID hit in our area, there were some restaurants that very efficiently and effectively pivoted to having a large percentage of their business takeout. They embraced it, and other restaurants embraced it less so. What's your experience with that?
The ones that embraced it from you as a consumer, let me just tell you the facts. They didn't make any money. They kept people employed, and that's great. And we did take out to go also, but it was 22 cents on the dollar of revenue, and we embraced it. But there was no money being made. So I think it was people wanting to, restaurants wanting to stay active, maybe keeping a small percentage of their team active, and that's great. And we did it. But I don't think you're going to bring a single restaurateur on here that says that they pivoted and truly replaced their, EBITDA or the cash flow, and they just didn't.
Yeah. So is that still true today? I mean, it seems like some restaurants, still a sizable amount of their business is takeout.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's a percentage of establishments in the restaurant space that, because of COVID, chose to start doing takeout before they didn't, and they woke up one day and were like, "Wow, I like this business." I'm sure that's the case, but it's not full service restaurants. I think about, maybe too much information, but if you truly have a great pasta dish at a restaurant, I can tell you it's quote unquote finished in the pan. What do I mean by that? The pasta is boiled. Hopefully it was fresh made. While the pasta is boiling in 2 or 3 minutes, the cook is beginning to compose the sauce.
Yes.
One ingredient at a time. It's then reduced to an appropriate texture. The pasta is pulled out of the boiling water. A little bit of that pasta water, because it's starched, is added to the sauce. It's quote unquote finished in the pan, probably with more butter than you wish to admit you're about to eat. And it's put on your plate, and it's delicious. Now imagine that dish sitting in a box for 27 minutes or 46 minutes on the way to your house. It sucks.
Right.
And so when we reopened our pasta restaurants, it took us 6 or 9 months to take what was very much necessary pre-made sauces and actually convert the kitchen back to a finish in the pan, so to speak, restaurant. And so these are very different businesses. Takeout food, I'll talk just chemistry of it. It's just a very different business. So there are takeout businesses and there are eat-in businesses. Now, there's some cuisines that lend themselves to traveling. I think Asian cuisines that are sauteed in a wok, that food travels really, really well. I think pizza travels well if it's constructed the right way. By the way, for the record, wood oven Neapolitan pizza, please don't eat it more than 90 seconds after it's out of the oven. It's going to be crap. It's not going to taste good. So it would be oversimplifying to say that a full service restaurant discovered takeout and now it's a big part of the business model. I think that's too simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Excellent point. So one last question for you. You said you were getting, and still on this theme, you said you were getting ready to possibly do a frozen pizza.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of seems to me to be a whole nother set of chemistry and packaging, and how do you make it taste good coming out of my oven at home? So talk a little bit about that experience.
It's really interesting because every time we tell people we're going to do frozen pizza, inevitably I get a picture of some artisanal restaurant brand that has done frozen pizza, and it's in the grocery store aisle because everybody is trying to do this now. It doesn't matter, especially in the cities. And those pizzas are all selling for $21, $23 a pie for a relatively small pie. And so it's good, it's a brand extension, if you will. But we're trying to be a mass market solution eventually, and really, again, healthy tension between mass market and artisanship. And we want our frozen pizza to be like $15 a pie. We're not going to necessarily compete with Amy's or Newman's Own for or Totino's or whatever they are, like for $11 or $10 a pie. But we want to be in the sort of $14, $15 a pie. So the question is it hand stretched by a human? We're learning that there are no machines in America that can massage the dough to create the air bubbles in the dough that create the type of texture you expect from a hand stretched pizza. They exist in Italy, apparently. They don't exist in the United States with what's called a co-packer who really makes the pizza for you when you do, co-packer. That we have a co-packer makes a pasta. Pasta is much, much easier. And so what we've decided to do is we're launching frozen pizza. We build a mini manufacturing facility in the basement of our flagship Flour and Water Pizzeria. And we spent a little bit of money in there, and we think we can do enough to satisfy a percentage of the demand in the Bay Area, actually making it in our basement ourselves. I don't know how much money we're going to make on this, though, because what we're really trying to do is learn, and we are going to hand stretch, and we're not going to sell it for $23 a pie. So this is us incubating right now and sort of learning about what works, what doesn't work. But I'll tell you right now, my chef partners, Ryan and Tom in this company, over their dead body will crappy food ever be sold by us. And so we haven't launched it yet. And I think part of the reason we haven't launched it is because we haven't figured it out yet. And we're close from what I understand, but we're not there yet.
Excellent. Excellent. Hey, David, I'd like to wrap this up. We've been chatting for 45 minutes. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring up and share with our listeners?
One of the main tenets, because I know this is a more of an entrepreneurial focused podcast, or the listeners are more entrepreneurial focused. I'm very critical of get rich quick type of businesses. I don't mean to be too critical of the venture capital community, but there's something called the power law in the venture capital community, which is to say that these funds that the venture capital community creates, they're 10-year funds, and they want to see results within 10 years. They're going to raise new funds. And this idea of the power law is, if 1 in 100 is monumentally successful and 25 of them are pretty successful and the rest of them fail or aren't successful, the math of that's really good for the VC investor, or for the investor, so to speak. What it doesn't talk about is the trauma that the entrepreneur suffers when they fail. And I've seen it over and over and over again. And so I'm sort of rambling a little bit here, but when I talk, you talk about, when we talked about One Wealth and we launched 10 years ago, and I pushed it back and said, no, really started 33 years ago, sort of one client at a time. And our restaurant company is one restaurant, get it right, grow, but grow slow and take it easy. And team retention, nurturing culture, make money, trust that you'll make money over time, keep your personal spending down so you don't spend more than you make, so you're not forced to make bad business decisions, and grow things. You put a chicken in an oven at 750 degrees, it ain't going to taste good. It may cook fast. If you cook chicken at 375 for an hour and 5 minutes or whatever the heck it is, you can't cook it faster, but it's going to taste really great. And I would say with business, I really do think that there is lack of appreciation these days for businesses that are started slowly, and there's an energy around them to grow, but people sort of take their time and do it the right way.
Yeah. Well said. It's a great way to close out this podcast. And let me just make one comment. Having been in the venture capital private equity business, I agree with you 100%. And the challenge is that that half dozen businesses that were not successful by VC standards could have been very successful businesses that provided wealth and employment to the individuals involved in that. But it didn't sort of make the cut to give that 10x or 20x exit that the VC needs because of the way their mathematics works. So I think it's a shame that half dozen businesses kind of fall by the wayside, and oftentimes just get closed down and shut, and that's it. And like you said, that's a lot of trauma that we need to come up with a better way of dealing with those things that do not make the VC standard, but still could be a very nice $7 or $8 million a year business.
Well, I would say that probably is more private equity than it is VC. That is to say, private equity, I think, is not trying to get instantaneous results where they're pushing for power law. They want every company to win that they end up doing business with. So I think that to distinguish VC from private. And by the way, I have friends that are in the VC space. There's some firms that are lovely and wonderful. So I'm not, excuse my language, shit canning the entire industry. I'm just saying, as an entrepreneur, you have a choice, and your choice is to swing for the fences and try to do it quick. And yes, occasionally there's a Google or Facebook in the mix, but more likely it's going to fail if that's your attempt. Whereas if you go low and slow, I like your chances better, and it's going to be less traumatic.
Yeah. And the point here is that once you hop on the VC train, you're on the VC train.
VC train, yeah, totally.
You ain't getting off, right? Mm. Well, you're being thrown. You may be thrown off the train, but there's no sort of, hey, okay, I want to exit this train. No, there isn't any. It's you either get thrown off or you ride the train till the end and be a success. Hey, David, it's really been wonderful chatting with you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
You betcha.
Bela, that really was an interesting interview. I got a lot of interesting tidbits out of it and learned some interesting perspectives. What were your main takeaways from this?
Well, my main takeaway, and everyone says this, is people, people, people. All businesses are about people, and what I mean by that is not just employees, but also customers. You have to, as a business owner, a manager or a leader of a business, you have to focus on both your employees and your customers. You want both of those groups to be happy, and you want them to be smiling. And because if they do that, many studies have shown people work harder, your customers come back, and that's also a great way of building trust. And trust is a very sticky thing from the perspective of employees. You don't have a lot of turnover. You have people who are devoted, respectful of each other, respectful of the customers. You have customers that are sticky, meaning that there's not a lot of customer turnover. They stay with you a long time. They're repeat customers. So I think those are two really important things that came out to me. Mike, I had a quick question for you. What did you think about the compensation plan at the financial advisory company?
Well, Bela, great question. And I love this kind of socialistic capitalistic blend, I think was the term that David used. Interesting experiment. And, I think in a relatively small organization of 12 people, equal pay sure can lead to a team approach, because it's not the traditional model of, you get incentive, right? For every dollar that you sell or whatever, you get a certain number of cents. It's we all help each other grow and build the business. And when the organization wins, we all win. But this is not, and he said it, it's not for kind of every size firm, and it's not for every type of person. I mean, you and I both know, and I think listeners are all aware, that people are motivated differently and they have a different sense of fairness. So one person that would say, hey, this is a really fair way to do it. We all work hard. We all help each other. Sometimes I have a tough month. Sometimes the person sitting next to me has a tough month. But if we all work together, it all works better. But some people don't. Some people are really focused. I mean, we all know that person, the person that if you have 6 pieces of pizza and they have 8 pieces of pizza, that you need to pay the $8.40 and I need to pay the $7.30 instead of splitting it 50-50. We all have friends like that. Some of us are that people, and that's okay. So I think this is a really cool experiment. You just have to be clear about it, and people kind of self-select into that system and select out if it's not for them. But this is part of how you develop a unique culture. And we've talked on this podcast time and time again about culture. And I think there's a direct relationship between the compensation model, how you pay people, and what the sense of fairness is, and the culture you build. And he reinforced that. It's directly connected to this idea where he had an approach of developing talent from within. So he would rather start somebody at an entry-level job and develop them, right, and have them grow up in that culture to be a high-level person rather than bringing in outside people that might not fit into this culture. So I think these two parts of his strategy really work well together, the kind of the equal pay, but also the hire and develop from within kind of mentality. I think if you disconnect those, maybe it doesn't work so well. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, Mike. About 20 years ago, I ran a high-end bicycle manufacturing business. The name of the company was Serrata. And we had about 40 employees total. And, that included marketing folks and advertising people and manufacturing people. We manufactured bicycles that 20 years ago we sold for $5,000-$6,000. And the business was struggling when I came in to run it. And one of the things that I noticed was that, people working on the manufacturing floor at that time were making $15 to maybe $25 an hour. And they see these $5,000 bicycles moving past them every day. And they're thinking to themselves, boy, somebody's making a lot of money. I know it's not me. And I did two things there that changed the behavior of individuals, much to your point, how these things can drive behavior and culture. One thing I did was every month I shared our financials at sort of a high level. And I had a list. Here's the top 20 checks we cashed, and here's the top 20 checks we wrote. And I categorized them, right? I'd say the check for salary, right? I didn't give everyone salary check, but here was our salary bill for this month. Here was the rent, the power, the blah, blah, blah. And I shared those every month. And you could, because I thought something people could understand, right? I wasn't going to put up a formal P&L statement up there because I can barely understand those things.
Mm-hmm.
And people saw that and they said, wow, I didn't realize we spent that much money on this or that. And the other thing I did was I said, the first $100,000 of profit we make every quarter, 50% of that will go back to the employees.
As a bonus. And take the number of employees we have, divide that into that number, and everybody gets the same bonus. Because my theory was your compensation is market-based. Welders were the highest paid people out there because they were welding thin-walled titanium tubing. They were really craftsmen. So they were super skilled, right? And so they were the highest paid folks. So your salary is market-based. The bonus, I wanted to make team-based. I wanted to make that this is the reward the whole team gets. And so I just took the number of employees and I divided it into the number that we had, and everybody got the same size bonus check. And it was interesting how it changed behavior. All of a sudden, our scrap, in other words, we painted bikes, and we painted, if Mike, you wanted to order one of our bikes and you wanted the color to match your Porsche, we would match it to your Porsche. Right? I don't have a Porsche, people, just so you know. Yeah.
So, we would do that kind of stuff, and we had standard colors, but you have a half a quart of paint left over. You can't do anything with it. Mm-hmm. We would throw it away. We would have all sorts of, manufacturing, you get a lot of scrap, you get a lot of consumables. Our scrap went down 90% and our consumable cost went down 55%. Wow. Because all of a sudden people every month, they saw how much we spent on paint. They saw how much we spent on welding rod. And they said, wow, if we save $1, we get a little piece of that.
Yeah, right? If it's 10 cents, right, or 5 cents, yes, great, or 2 cents, great, but it's a little piece of it goes in your pocket.
There was a link. There was a link between their actions and their compensation. And the other interesting thing that happened was when I first got there, it took me about a year to figure this out and put this plan together. And that first year, we need to hire another welder. We're getting backed up. Or we need to hire another person in the machine shop.
Yeah.
And
Like that's one more person to share the
yes,
bonus with.
and now all of a sudden they said, so instead of dividing by 40, we're going to divide by 41. And people quickly, so now all of a sudden there was this cooperation between the various different sort of manufacturing cells we had. People would say, hey, if you need an extra hour of help over in the machine shop, I'll come over.
Right.
I can do that for you because I got a little extra time. Right.
Fascinating.
So it just, I think these compensation plans are so important, particularly in certain types of environments where cooperation is important, and in many environments it is, that if you think that through, I think it can make a huge impact on your business.
Yeah, no, I love it. And then next step, I love the transition to the restaurant business. I mean, this kind of hypothesized coexistence between art and profit, that you could make beautiful food and make money doing it. It was an interesting hypothesis. And again, this kind of the point that he made at the end, he didn't go for fast growth. He went for slow growth. And, one thing that you said that you and I have said a lot over this podcast is that the best way to grow is with your own money, not with somebody else's money, if you can do it, right? And he did that, it sounds like, right? That they grew from 1 to 2 to 3 to now whatever they've got. Now they're doing products, right? Consumer products and food products, branded food products. Really cool. So I thought that was a neat blend kind of moving from his financial services world into the restaurant world. What did you think?
Yeah, I think these multiple locations, when you expand from one location to another location, it really, you really need to focus on the processes that you have in place for all sorts of things. And here again, I can tell you another story. When we lived in California, started a medical robotics company out there, and we were all in one building in sort of one of these, a typical industrial park. We were in this building, all of us were there because there was, 15 of us, and we started growing, and then we needed more space. So we rented space across the street in a different building. So now we had 2 buildings. The buildings were next to each other. It was across the street, not a busy street. It's a street. It's like a neighborhood street. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a street in the neighborhood. And the weather in California is always nice. And those 2 buildings had 2 different cultures. Right? It was something that
Interesting. Yeah, never would imagine.
I should have done a better job at that. And I didn't, because it wasn't sort of on my radar. I didn't think that would happen. It's just right across the street. And I can remember people on the phone, person in one building talking to a person in the other building, and they're having this heated conversation. And I'd say, get off the phone, go meet out in the middle of the street, or go meet in the parking lot if you want to meet in a neutral territory.
Yeah, but you're not going to talk that way to a person when they're standing in front of you 9 times out of 10.
Exactly. Exactly. So my point being is that when you go from one location to multiple locations, there's a lot of additional things you need to think about, particularly as it goes to how people communicate, what the structures are, what the processes are, and particularly if you're manufacturing things, i.e. a restaurant manufactures food, right? Manufactures plates of food, and you're doing it in 2 different places. If you want to have some level of consistency, you have to take those processes and have them well documented. Otherwise, you're going to get variability. And I think David's point is, how do I let the chef still be creative and sort of make things his own way and give him that satisfaction, right? One thing that has things that have things totally ironed out are sort of franchises, right? They have processes down to everything. That's sort of one end of the extreme. The other one is each restaurant is its own animal, has its own menu. And I think David was trying to balance where on that spectrum he wants to be. And I think that's just sort of an interesting problem. It's sort of an interesting management problem and a process problem.
Yeah, but it was neat. He balanced taking a bunch of risk, right? He had to sell his apartment, right, to start it up, but he's kind of balanced that with this slow growth approach, and he applied some lessons from each business across the boundary to the other side, 2 seemingly very different businesses, right, different industries. But there was some kind of cross fertilization of philosophies and ideas there. So I thought, it was a really cool story and a really interesting guest. What do you think? Should we wrap this one up?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. Let's call it a day.
Great. All right, listeners, thanks for yet another interesting entrepreneurial interview. We hope that you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed. And we hope that you found the questions thought-provoking and the individual somebody that you can take something with. As always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
And hey, if you like the podcast, please hit that follow button on your favorite podcasting app. Tell other people about the podcast. We think there's some pretty good stuff here, and hopefully we can grow some of our listeners. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you all soon.
Thanks, Bela. And for over here in Münster, Germany, we'll see you next time.